how should one utilize caffeine if they wake up and they're still feeling sleepy?
So if you wake up and you're still feeling sleepy, I don't think I have a problem with caffeine. I don't have a problem with nicotine. Like, there are stimulants out there that when used appropriately, I don't think there's a big deal to them. It's just when you move too far past that, or you're finding yourself a level of dependence on these things. Caffeine is a tough one because, quite honestly, you drink it, you feel a little bit of juice from it, and then you don't feel anything from it, but it's still in your system for 6 to 8 hours as a half-life. So that's where it gets problematic for people when they're trying to fall asleep, especially people who already have insomnia, because a lot of them have got a good bit of anxiety with it. I would argue, Max, that in my practice over the years, 75% of my insomniacs have got a significant amount of anxiety. Like, that's what we're treating for the most part. And it's helpful and it works. But at the end of the day, these are some anxious people, and we've got to figure out better ways to settle them down.
Are there any natural, supplements perhaps that might help turn down the dial on anxiety?
Absolutely. So one of the first things, though, I try to do with all my patients when they come to me for supplementation is I say, hold on a second, let's do some blood work. My very first question is, what are you deficient in? I'm pretty sure you're not deficient in ashwagandha, but you might be deficient in vitamin D, magnesium, melatonin. There's a couple of things, iron. That's when I want you to do a blood test first, and let's get everything up to par levels and see how this unit works when everything's in it and running. If you're still not sleeping, then I definitely have recommendations, but it's going to depend more on your symptomatology. So if you turn to me and say, hey, Michael, I'm doing all this stuff, I don't have any deficiencies, I'm going to bed when you told me to, but I'm having a hard time settling down, then you might want to look at a valerian, because valerian is probably the most well-studied. And if you actually have it with hops, that preparation seems to actually work pretty well in most cases. So that might be something, versus you might turn to me and say, you know what, I'm sleepy, but I'm sleepy at the wrong times. Melatonin is probably what we would look for there. I also want to be thoughtful here, because a lot of people are wondering, like, why hasn't he mentioned melatonin yet? That's like the big sleep hormone, okay? So let's be super duper clear. Melatonin is the most overused supplement in history. It's not what we think it is, okay? Melatonin's a hormone, number one, and it got under the FDA regulation, so it's not being regulated. So you actually can't get melatonin in most countries. Yeah, like if you go to Australia, they're going to be like, Max, you need a prescription for that.
I didn't realize
Most of Europe, you need a prescription for it. So that's number one. Number two, at high dosages, it's birth control. It's actually a contraceptive. Yeah. Right? And so here's the problem, is when a pediatrician tells a mom or a dad to give their kid melatonin, right? Like, I can't think of anything worse for a young female developing body than adding a contraceptive when it's not necessary, right? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Now, melatonin is an incredible antioxidant, and there are a lot of people who have used it in other types of situations outside of sleep, which I find pretty fascinating. An example of that is long COVID. Right? So there's people out there who are getting tremendous dosages, like 20, 30, 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams of melatonin during long COVID. And what they're finding is it's an amazing antioxidant, but wow, these people feel like dog shit on that much melatonin. You know you've hit way too much melatonin when you're getting really funky dreams, super duper vivid ones. Also, another problem with melatonin, why I don't like people to just kind of go out and take it on their own. People don't know this, but it affects birth control, it affects antidepressant medication, it affects diabetes medication, and it affects heart medication. So, because it's a circadian pacemaker, right? And so all of those things have to be in your system at a particular time. That's why we have people take drugs at the same time every day, so that much is in their system so that the medication is working appropriately. And, to be fair, you know me, I'm not a pro-drug guy at all. But at the end of the day, if you take something like melatonin, it's going to play around with everything else that you're taking.
Well, in what context would melatonin as a supplement then be helpful?
Jet lag, shift work, something called REM behavior disorder. This is a really interesting situation where people act out their dreams, like full on. It's crazy, but very interesting. There's a new study out looking at ADD and ADHD where we've seen that melatonin can actually be helpful there. And in people with a melatonin deficiency who have insomnia. I would say those are the 5 big cases where I think it would make a lot of sense. So what we're looking for is if there's a circadian disruption, like in jet lag or in shift work, right? You're forcing somebody to work at night or you're traveling a million miles away. That's where it really has a tendency to work itself out well.
And is there an appropriate, what is the appropriate dose?
So this is an interesting story. So this doctor out of MIT, Dr. Workman, is the person who did all the studies and figured out that you need between 1/3 and 1.5 milligrams of melatonin to reach plasma concentration levels. And then he patented the dose. And
interesting. Is that why you can't find that
exactly
low of a dose typically?
Because nobody wants to pay his patent fee or whatever it's called, licensing fee. So people just said, because it's not regulated, fuck it, let's just double it,
How do you
triple
do
it. They just doubled it and they just made it.
How do you patent a dose though?
I don't know. It was back in the day. I mean, it's a really interesting story, but he was able to do it, and now everybody else does it differently.
Wow. Yeah. Typically, you see 3 milligrams. That's like
right, which is
dose.
probably double what a normal adult yours or my size would need.
Wow.
And if you're crazy enough to give it to kids, which I don't recommend, you wouldn't want anywhere near that dose.
Wow. Very.
Now, but there is one kid population where we actually do see it important, and it works, is in the autism spectrum. Kids on the spectrum and kids full on autism, absolutely it works well in those kids at higher dosages, like 3, 4, 5 milligrams a night.
Interesting. So melatonin can work in that population, children with autism, as a sleep aid.
Yeah, it's
particularly
particularly well for that group of kids.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, if there are any parents out there who are like, oh, fantastic, like, number one, check with your doctor, because if your child's on other medications, remember, this is a supplement that can change the effectiveness of other medications, so we just want to be thoughtful.
If you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.